Well, this is Lynn Fraser with the Killaby Center for Recovery and the Radical Recovery Summit. And I'm really happy to be here today with Catie Lynch. So we had a little technical problem, so Katie's not going to be on video, but we'll show some other pictures and slides, or you could just listen to it on the audio. So Catie, welcome. So nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Thank you. Yeah. So what I wanted to get into is the whole diet culture, healthy at every weight, pandemic, COVID pounds coming on. There's so much going on right now, but before we
Yeah.
get to that, why don't you just say a little bit about what kind of work you do and how you came to this?
I'm a eating disorder therapist, licensed clinical social worker, and eating recovery coach. So I got into this work as a lot of activism part of me. Once I healed my own eating disorder, it felt really important for me to continue to do this work. I don't know anybody in the at least any women who have not struggled with body image, whether that is a full on eating disorder or not. So it hits everybody in certain ways. That felt really important to me after my own recovery from my eating disorder, and felt even more important when I had two daughters. So I have two girls, a 3-year old and a 1-year old. And that just kind of propelled me further to, I mean, there's a lot of like fighting in it, like trying to like teach people a lot of what we've been taught is false. And then a lot of work in terms of like one-on-one and group coaching and counseling. And I love it. I mean, it like lights me up. It's fun. It's difficult. It's
Mhm.
emotional. But like what happens on the other side of it is magical.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I think having daughters must be really, it adds so much more importance and risk. So many girls and women have so many struggles with this and so much shame and so much I'm not good enough. And I
Yes.
remember as a teenager being a completely healthy weight and hating my thighs, just thought my thighs were so horrible.
Hmm.
And yeah, it starts really young. And I think it even starts younger now.
Yes, I read that like children, girls usually, but between the ages of like 5 and 10, like 50% of them want to lose weight.
Wow.
And that's crazy. I mean,
It is.
that's wild. Like, it's wild that they even know about weight loss. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
all
yeah.
of it is wild. But it also, because of that, it feels really important to me to at least try to control what happens at home for my kids. I can't do anything about really what happens outside of my house in terms of what messaging they'll receive. But it seems like we are moving forward in a direction of recognizing and understanding that dieting is not sustainable. The problem is now, the word is now like wellness, right? And so like now, like it's all about like quote unquote health, which actually
Mhm.
isn't healthy, right? So dieting, and people have realized that that word is harmful. So we have now chosen other words like lifestyle changes, which are still based in restriction and in still to diet mindset, right? So
Yeah,
it's trying to really be loud about this stuff is what it's coming up for me, is like women learning to take up space, being loud about this kind of stuff, really feeling a big push to scream about health at every size, because it is so important for everybody. You know, I can't imagine what it would have been like if somebody told me, and I also wasn't a bigger person as a child, but if somebody had said like it's actually okay that you're not skinny, you know? Like I wonder what if would that have changed things for me, you know? Like I don't know, right? But I think just being given the permission to not be thin is a big deal. That
right,
that's not that important. And not that it's not that important, but you don't have that much control over it,
right.
right? Like health at every size states like your weight is basically based on your genetic. And people really fight that one. You know, they really don't like to hear that because it makes us feel not in control.
Ah, right, right.
Hmm.
So, so that's one of the big things that you're trying to get across? What are some of the other real fundamental lies that we've been
Yeah.
told?
Yeah. I wrote about this the other
Just
day.
be
I'm trying to
clearly.
think. There's so many lies. Like a lot of lies that I have had to undo for myself are that I'm going to be happier if I'm thinner,
Mhm.
that the world will open up to me if I'm thinner. And I understand that one because we live in a fat phobic society. So people are pretty anti fat. And so there's a lot of work around that one. But so that's big. What else felt big to me was recognizing that I'm allowed to be this weight, right? Like I don't have to lose weight unless like I want to. You know what I mean? Like I always thought I was supposed to be skinny, and that if I was skinny, I'd be a more successful, happier person. And actually, the opposite is what happened for me. I still live in a straight size body. So I have like a genetically unfair advantage in what I'm trying to say is that um when I was really sick, I thought that my life was going to get a lot better once I was skinny, and it got really small is what happened, right? So because that's all I thought about. That's all I thought about was how skinny can I be, how can I maintain this weight. So I think that belief that being thin will help you is a myth and a lie. And another one that can be really important is that dieting actually makes you gain weight. Like that's a truth, but we don't know that, right? Like, so we're not taught that weight cycling is actually the problem. It's not the weight that you actually are at, right? So our body has a set point, it has a place where it wants to be. We are the ones that manipulate it and try to change it and control it. And what happens when we do that is our body actually is protecting us by adding weight to our body. So the more that we diet, the more our set point increases. So I kind of wonder, like, would people be as gung ho about dieting if they knew that, right? Like, would maybe they would because there's a really, we fall into that magical thinking illusion that this
Mm.
is going to work for me, right? And like I'll be able to maintain this forever. um, I think people don't know the statistics on dieting that people are able to maybe maintain their weight for a maximum of 5 years. So that's a really low statistic of success, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. It's like hard to even say that like carbs are bad for you, like that like carbs make you gain weight when no, that's not true,
Mm.
Nothing inherently makes you gain weight, right? It's like, is your body meant to be this way? Are we holding on to trauma and stress in our body? Is this the way that our body was designed to be? My weight always comes back to this exact weight that I am right now, the weight that I fought my whole life.
Mhm.
Even at 18, I was this weight. I'm 32.
Mhm.
And it's not that it hasn't changed and ebbed and flowed and fluctuated, but here I am still at the weight that I was like, oh, this is horrible, right?
Yeah.
Um, BMI is total BS. Like we weren't taught that like BMI was created by a white European man in like the 1800s, and it had nothing to do with actually measuring health.
Mhm.
And everybody's like, oh well, my BMI is high, and I'm like, your BMI doesn't mean anything.
Right.
When I was at my sickest weight, when I was like the smallest size I still had an over I'm doing air quotes for anybody who you can't see me, but an overweight BMI. Right? Like I was still overweight. And I mean, all of those things that we are just like so ingrained to believe because we have been messaged this since we were 0 years old.
Mhm.
It's so hard. It's so hard. And I also think it's hard to give up on the dream and belief that losing weight will make me happy. There's a lot of grief in that.
Right. So there's so many things I want to follow up on
I
here.
know.
So let's start with the delusion that people have that, okay, I know that 97% of people gain the weight back and more, but I'm going to be the exception.
But I'm different. Right. Yeah.
And
Right.
I've done 100 times before, but this time it's going to stick.
Right.
How do you work with that with people? How does that
Yeah.
process of change happen?
Okay, so usually there's a lot of validation and normalization in the fact that they think they can do it differently, right? Like I was one of those people who was like, I have this figured out, so I'm not going to give it up, right?
Right.
And so I think understanding that that person is not in the same mindset change as somebody who is like, this clearly isn't working for me anymore. What can I do differently? It's treating those people both with respect and unconditional regard, but recognizing they're in really different stages of change, right? So for somebody who is unable to be flexible currently in that moment about, well, what if we didn't diet? Like, what would that be like, right? Versus the person who is like, I have been dieting for 25 years and I'm miserable, right? Like, there's different approaches I think to take with those people.
Mm-hmm.
With somebody who feels like I'm different, I'm the exception, right? My response lately in sessions has been if it doesn't work for them, it's not going to work for you. And if it works for them, it's going to work for you. So, like this, at least when you have an eating disorder, you believe you're different.
Mm-hmm.
You believe A, that you can't recover, and also that you're different than other people, where other people may deserve to recover, but you don't. So, it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of that same mindset of like, I can do this, I'm different, right? Like, my weight won't change. And that's possible if you have an eating disorder. Maybe you are unwilling to let that go, right? So for the person who is wanting change and wanting to recover and or wanting to recover from disordered eating if it's not an eating disorder, those people are typically the ones who are more receptive to that statistic.
Right. Right.
However,
Right.
if they're in if they're in my presence, they're in my room, like I'll often say like you're here for a reason, right? Like clearly something doesn't feel right. Otherwise we wouldn't have made this appointment.
Right.
So I understand that this weight maybe gives you comfort, right? It's not really comfort, it's the illusion of comfort, right? But
Right.
what else have you gained from this, right? And it's usually a lot of nothing, right? It's usually like I've lost my relationships. I can't function at work, or I'm obsessing about food all day, which is enough to make that miserable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
looking at it from that place of what's not working here, right? What's not working? And are you willing to possibly accept being questioned differently, right? Or looking at it differently? Is that an option for you?
Mm-hmm.
Most people will say yes, I'm willing to think about it differently. But people do have a very hard time with the idea of giving up. And I did too, this belief that, well, all my quote unquote hard work is going down the drain. And
Right.
then I say, like, hard work is in like the eating disorder, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like, that's what we worked for. But you didn't recognize it at the time, but that's where we are.
Mm-hmm. How do you see the difference between an eating disorder and disordered eating?
Yes. So eating disorders have a lot of very distinct um, clinical traits. So I think that they can present really similarly, but my distinction in like when I go through this in groups is that I think every single person who has dieted has had disordered eating or has it currently.
Mm-hmm.
But not every person who um, diets or has a disordered eating has an eating disorder. So, an
Right.
eating disorders are like, like at the end of the spectrum of severity, right? And so there's whether or not I agree with the DSM or not, like there's a whole list of things that you have to quote unquote meet to
Mm-hmm.
have that. With disordered eating, it may not be, but I still treat them the same. Personally, I still treat them the same.
Right.
Um, Obviously, if somebody's very severe and requires, like for the further residential or inpatient care, that's typically not what you see with disordered eating. But that's just typically, like it can present a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think that a lot of their thought patterns are very similar.
Right.
But with disordered eating, you can often kind of maybe nip it in the bud before it becomes an eating disorder, because a lot of the times it does.
Do you think people can recover from eating disorders?
1,000%.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know it's not, there's no typical, but kind of in a typical way, what does that look like? What are some of those steps to go from having no control, being really compulsive around food, really in denial about your eating disorder, to getting to some kind of health internally?
I don't think that I can answer that question because every eating disorder looks differently, right? So,
Mhm.
like, besides the fact, like, there's restrictive eating disorders, there's binge eating disorders, there's RFID, like, there's so many different kinds. But what
Right,
I can say, I will give you some sort of answer, is that, like, underneath all of it is an avoidance of feeling. So,
right,
underneath all of that stuff, all of those behaviors, is somebody who is in pain and somebody who is needing love, support, connection, and who needs to be heard. If that person can be given those things in a safe way, there's a chance they can be healed. All of those behaviors, in my opinion, and then I think the opinion of most clinicians, is that those behaviors are symptoms, right? So, like, once I was able to not hate myself anymore, like, and that was through therapy and nutrition work, like, that wasn't like, oh, Katie's not going to do this X, Y, and B behavior today. The behaviors did stop, right? Because I was able to, like, look inside but feel safe enough that I could, right?
mm,
So I think that every single person with an eating disorder needs a team of people. Like, that's, to me, a basic one, like a therapist, a coach, a nutritionist, or a dietitian, a medical doctor if needed, to be on the same page and mostly to give unconditional support because it's a process, right? And we only are able to process our, like, traumas and our demons and our feelings if we feel safe. If
right.
there's no safety, there's no healing.
Well, and it seems to me that it's very clear to me anyway that when I eat something that I don't need, if I eat in a disordered way, that it's because I'm prioritizing emotional avoidance over physical health. The body takes one for the team kind of a thing that happens over
Yeah.
and over and over.
Hmm. But I think that there's also a demonization of that, and that that's pretty normal sometimes. Like, we all eat emotionally.
Mhm.
And it's so interesting to me is, like, people are hard on themselves when they maybe quote unquote overeat, but nobody's hard on themselves when they undereat. So, like, you can have a day emotionally where you don't feel any appetite. Nobody's going to say anything to you about that.
Right.
You might even get praised for it, right?
Mhm.
But if you're having a day where you're like, the only thing I want to do is sit in my bed and eat like a sourdough loaf, right? Like, you might get ganged up on, right? People will be like, "Oh, what are you not paying attention to in your emotional health?" Which is
Right.
true, but it goes on the other side of the spectrum also.
What are you seeing around stigma around fat
Mhm.
people, right, in the last several years? You mentioned that you think it might be getting a little better, or there's more awareness about it anyway.
I think that there's maybe more visible awareness, but I think internally people still feel the same way. And
Yeah.
that's probably because they haven't done any work around it, right?
Mhm.
Or they're unwilling or ignorant to it. I mean, I know that I would say probably 4 years ago, I didn't know what fat phobia was. Like, I hated fat people. And I didn't actually hate them, but I felt triggered by them, right? But, like, I would have told you, like, fat people are unhealthy and disgusting. I would have said that to you.
Mhm.
And that was a product of me feeling scared to be fat, of
Mhm.
me having years of wanting to lose weight, of me feeling treated not so great because I wasn't thin, right? And then the eating disorder brain of me thought I was better than other people because I wasn't fat, right? So when I really was unable to unravel that, and I was willing to do it, right? So, like, a lot of people are unwilling to even, like, know what fat phobia is. They're like, that's stupid and made up, and it's like what people who are obese say. Like, and I'm like, that's what the rhetoric around that a lot of the time is.
So it's
In
like
my
an
world, like my eating disorder world, people are very well versed in fat phobia and internalized fat phobia, right? So it just kind of depends on who you're talking to, I think. But
Mhm.
I think what is getting better is people being shown a variety of bodies. I think that's helping.
Mhm.
I think having companies be told like you are not inclusive, be more inclusive does help because it shows people who look like them that it's okay to look like them. Growing up, I never saw anybody on TV or in a magazine look like me,
Right.
right? And I'm a straight size white girl, right? And I still
Mhm.
didn't see people look like me because I wasn't thin or like I people didn't have braces and acne on TV or in the movies, right? And so imagine what it would feel like to be like a larger bodied black woman, never see yourself anywhere,
Mhm.
right? So I do think that that shift is helpful, but I
And that's
don't think enough shift has happened.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
The conditioning goes so deep, and the
Mhm.
shaming goes so deep of
Mhm.
my
Mhm.
body size, but also even looking at other people's bodies. Like, my mom never really commented on my body when I was a teenager, but she was always commenting on everybody else's fat bodies.
And so then you learn fat bodies are unlovable or
Yeah,
fat bodies aren't as good.
yeah.
Right. And so like and I work with a lot of clients who are in a recovery stage where they may be gaining weight and they have
Mhm.
all expressed to me like nobody's saying anything to me about my body anymore. And I'm like, well, how do you feel? And they're like, it shows me that I've gained weight. Because
Right.
when I was skinnier, people were always talking about it. And now that I've gained weight, it's silent.
Mhm.
And I'm like, there's grief in that. Right. But all of that is about the other person, right? Like none of that, it feels like it's about you, but it's really not. It's all of their unhealed wounds being projected onto you.
Right. Years ago, I'd lost some weight, and I was at a pretty normal weight, and I remember being out somewhere in the summertime, and I had an ice cream cone, and I was really enjoying it, and people were kinda smiling at me like, "Oh, look at she's really enjoying her ice cream." What a difference that was from other times when I was a heavier weight and people would look at me with that disgust. And one time I even had a waiter in a restaurant
Heartbreaking,
say
honestly.
it is. A waiter in a restaurant said, "I don't think you need dessert." I mean, this was, 40 years ago, so
I
things
don't
were different.
care how long it was ago.
That's terrifying. Or
The
it's
audacity of somebody to
yeah,
think that they have the agency to comment on you or your body is atrocious. And that is still absolutely happening. And
yeah,
yeah, maybe we're 40 years down the road, but the stuff that people who are fat or live in large bodies deal with is, I mean, it's all the time. It's daily,
yeah,
and they are praised for losing weight and they are praised for eating disorders.
yeah,
Praised for them.
mhm, yeah,
Whereas somebody who could have the exact same type of eating disorder, but who is small, is being sent to residential treatment immediately. Right.
yeah,
And it's like these people are both equally sick,
mhm,
right? But people are like, oh, she's really got it together. She's finally lost the weight. It's like, do we know how she lost the weight? Right?
right,
Like, did she do a really, is she really ill? Right?
mhm,
But yeah, I mean, I always have to say in all podcasts or in all interviews, like I have privilege. I have thin privilege. And so all this stuff is a bit easier for me than it is if I were bigger. Right?
right,
So was recovering easy? No. Is
yeah,
dealing with the feelings? No. But societally, am I treated differently because of my body? No. And that is not something I will ever have to experience. Right. And so all of the love and compassion to send to those people who want to lose weight, like, of course they do. Of course they do. Nobody wants to be treated like SHIT, you know?
yeah,
They don't.
right.
And it makes sense.
It totally makes sense, yeah. So one of the things that I've noticed that is that I've healed my trauma, especially childhood trauma, is that I don't shame myself the way I did before.
Mhm.
So I might still be having similar behaviors, especially during COVID. I've noticed that I've really slipped back. A lot of things that had kind of been in my past, and not just eating, but procrastination and not being productive, those kinds of things too. And it's really clear how the nervous system kind of affects all of that, how we move through our days. And I have so much more kindness and compassion for myself now. And I never call myself names. I never shame myself for it. It's just okay, this is here right now. How am I going to work with this?
Yes.
But that's not common. Most people,
No,
I think,
it's not
feel
common.
really like a shame storm.
Yes. I found that
Yeah.
people are just so mean to themselves,
Hmm.
and like would never say any of the same sort to their friends, family, children, partners, whomever. Which is why I think
Hmm.
that quote, like, if it's not true for them, it's not true for you, right? Like, and so
Right.
what does that look like? So let's say like I decided to like eat 6 pieces of pizza for dinner because I am having a hard time. If your friend
Hmm.
told you, "Oh, I'm having a lot of pizza tonight," you'd be like, "Oh, okay." If it's you, you're like, "You are such a gross pig, and what is wrong with you?" And like, you know what I mean? Like the dialogue that we have with ourselves is so nasty in comparison to that in which you'd have with somebody else. What I have
Hmm.
also noticed though is the
Hmm.
less that I judge me, the less I judge others. The less that
Hmm.
like I feel more accepted in my skin, in my body, and my feelings and who I am, I have a lot more love for other people too. It was a lot easier for me to judge others when I was really sick.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about how that works for you with your daughters.
Mhm.
What's that like on a day-to-day basis? And how old are
Mhm.
they now?
So they're little. I have a 1 year old and a 3 year old. What that looks like, I guess, in my home is so Ellen's a 3 year old. She has picked up some things from school that I don't like. And so I have to remind myself that I don't have that much control, right, over anything in general, but especially what happens outside of the house. And so she'll say things at dinner time like, "Oh, mama, I made a happy plate." And the first time I didn't know what that was. And then I figured out that she was taught at one of her schools that a happy plate meant that she ate it all.
Oh,
And so she no longer goes to this school. Not because of that, but like it didn't help. Um, but
right.
she still says it. Like, but now every single time I have to say, "Ellen, all of your plates are happy. No matter what you eat or what you don't eat, your plate is still happy." Right. And it's hard because she's proud of herself when she's telling me this. She's
Mhm.
proud that she's eaten because she has been taught, not by us, but from somebody else, that it's a positive to eat your whole plate.
Right. Yeah.
And so she wants validation from me. And so it's this like line of validating her and trying to validate her as a person versus like the fact that she ate her dinner. But I'm also proud
Mhm.
of her that so it's confusing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I do have to keep bringing it back to like, I want you to eat what makes you feel good and don't want you to eat what doesn't. And there's no
Right.
prize in this home for having a clean plate club, you know?
Right.
And there's also no penalty for not, right? Like it's all neutral. But what's hard is the lack of ability to do anything about that in a school setting or in somebody else's home, right? So I
Yeah.
can't do anything about that. So that stuff is hard for me.
Right.
But what we try to do a lot is we do a lot of family meals so that she sees me eating, and I make that a priority because I want them to see me eat. Like the other day, Ellen was like, "Mama, you didn't eat breakfast." And I was like, "Shit, like I didn't eat breakfast with them." And it wasn't, I was just busy. Like I was unloading the dishwasher. I usually eat when they go to school, when Ellen goes to school.
Mm.
But she's noticing it. Right. And so that
Right.
makes me see, like, why don't you just sit down for a minute and have some toast with her? Right.
Mhm.
And so while these things may not be that big of a deal, is they're extra, I feel activated by them. Right. And I'm sure hyper activated because this is my work, but I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to do everything I can to make this as safe and easy and fun as possible, like food, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
women often get the women often get the like martyr role of like, well, I'm not going to eat until the rest of my family eats, or oh, the last piece of pie can be for my husband. I do the opposite of that. Like, we all get it. You know what I
The
mean?
compen
Like,
Yeah. Mhm.
and if for some reason we've run out, like I will find something else, you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, but we don't like ban sugar in the house. Like everything is kind of, I really try to do it neutral, but it's hard because I still have stuff ingrained in me,
Mhm.
right? Like
Yeah.
yesterday, so we made sugar cookies this weekend, and she obviously wants to eat them, which is fine. Um, she yesterday came home from school and said, "Can I have two?" And I was like, "We're just gonna have one for now." And my thought process was like, I want her to be hungry for her dinner. I don't want her to have too much sugar because she'll act crazy at night.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there's also this part of me that's like, I don't want you to have two cookies. Right. And so trying to like figure out what's hers and what's mine here, it's
Mhm.
work.
Mhm.
and and figuring out like, of course I want her to be healthy and have like, and part of that is my job. Like I make the rules in the house about what the kids are fed, right? So figuring out what part of this is leftover eating disorder brain, what part of this is wanting my kids to have nutrient dense meals, what part of this is it's just a cookie, it's not that big of a deal, right?
Right.
So all of that is constantly in flux. And at the end of it, I feel like I'm just trying to do the best I can around it. And it's definitely not perfect.
But, it's such an insight to even to like, you're really part of it is your work, I know, and your own
Mhm.
healing, but you notice that she's noticing that you're not eating in the morning.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
if you were combining that, which many people do, of, "Oh, look at this, I can get into this dress now," or, "Oh,
Mhm.
I'm so happy I'm losing weight," or any of
Mhm.
those, and then
Mhm.
the other side of, "Oh, I'm so disgusting, look at this fat body,"
Yeah.
and the messages that I mean, girls especially, but boys too, get about their bodies is so toxic.
Right.
It's hard to I mean, I think it's relatively easy to see some of the toxicity and clean it up a little bit. So maybe, a lot of women now are going, "Well, I shouldn't be talking about diets around my children," or I
Right.
should be modeling better behavior,
Right.
better eating and more sanity in that. All of that conditioning that we have is pretty unconscious. It just comes up.
Yes, it is unconscious, and
Mhm.
that is the hard part is is recognizing what can I do with this? And my answer to that is usually like, well, you need to keep healing it. Like for me, I think the greatest gift I could have given them is healing my eating disorder because
Mhm.
surely I'd be a really different mom right now had I not.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be because I don't care, because I know moms who have eating disorders who really care, right? It's not
Mm,
about lack of caring or loving, it's you don't know any better,
right.
right? And most people, unless this is their job and work, they don't know any better. And
Mhm.
they are just trying to do their best for their kids and keep their kids healthy. And their uh, definition of healthy is just different than mine, you know?
Right. So what about the explosion of type 2 diabetes, part of which is caused by really unhealthy eating habits, not a once in a while cookie, but just a lot of sugar and carbs and not enough exercise. How do you work with something like that? I mean, there is a real pathway to addiction that happens when we feed that all the time.
So I have learned a lot more about type 2 diabetes than I ever thought I would want to.
Yeah.
And I learned it all from Health at Every Size, which is that book created by Linda Bacon.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of shame being given to people with type 2 diabetes that it's their fault, that they overate to a disgusting point and have now given themselves an illness,
Mhm.
which actually isn't true. So, what this book refers to, and I'm not an expert, and I would encourage anyone to read it in case make some mistakes, but it is largely genetic.
Mhm.
Even type 2 is largely genetic. And a lot of it is about weight cycling. So it's about the weight loss and weight gain and weight. And so it's dieting. Dieting is actually the problem. It's not necessarily the cookie that you ate the other day. And I know that that's simplistic. And it's about your insulin levels, which you also don't have that much control over.
Mhm.
So a lot of it is misinformation And unfortunately, a lot of that misinformation makes people, and doctors have misinformation around it too. So
Mm.
doctors are also, I think, just trying to do their best. But what they're saying is you need to cut out all carbohydrates and lose weight. And that's not the answer either, right? So I have started following some accounts on Instagram that have been really helpful in who actually specialize in diabetes and nutrition and eating disorders. Because what happens is a lot of people with type 2 diabetes are then told you can't eat anything anymore.
Right.
So and then they get eating disorders because they're in these highly restrictive mentalities. And so takeaway from all of that is that type 2, like type 1, is genetic,
Hmm.
and that most people are not eating 46 Big Macs a week to get it.
No.
They're actually just really normal people who have different chemical balances happening in their body. And to read that book because she explains it much better than I do.
Right. Right.
Mhm. But I have friends who recently got diagnosed with type 2 diabetes who does not live in a large body, does not partake in fast food eating.
Mhm.
And she's miserable and struggling because all of her doctors are like, well, if you lose weight, this will be better. And she's like, I physically can't lose weight. My body won't let me lose weight.
Yeah.
Like the insulin level is really complicated here, right? I have like a lot of feelings around it, but I also am not enough educated to truly explain it well.
Right. And that's something people could do, though, is educate themselves more on how this actually works. And the other thing we can do is look back at our parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles and look at who had type 2 diabetes, because I have some of that in mine, and who was
Mhm.
heavier weight.
Mhm.
Um, the thing that always keeps coming back to me, though, is the trauma connection.
Mm.
And not in the sense of if I heal my trauma, I'm going to lose weight,
Mhm.
but in the sense of there was a lot of the weight that came on was, seems to me, to be directly related to trauma and not being in my body. And for a woman, especially in our culture, I know I've talked to women who've said, and this is my experience too, when I was a smaller size, I got hit on all the time by guys.
Mhm.
When I'm a larger size, they leave me alone. And I like that. It's worth whatever health risks there are to be bigger
Mhm.
because I don't have to deal with their crap all the time.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
So
Right. And
where do
like
we go?
so I think that that does happen. I think that people are trying to protect themselves in every way, no matter
Mhm.
what's happening, that like our brain goes into protective mode.
Mm.
And whether our brain is like weight gain will help you, weight loss will help you, um, yoga will help you, right? Like our brain is trying to protect us. And so often recognizing when once you're able to step out and say, like, do I need help in this way? Or can I cope differently? Right? Like, will me gaining weight to avoid being looked at, will that will that work for me long term? Is that what I want? You
Mhm.
know, maybe in the beginning it is, and that's okay. Right?
Right.
Like,
Mhm.
or if you're dealing with intense trauma and not wanting to be looked at or touched works for you, that's okay.
Right.
Right? So, but I think that a question that I'll pose to clients often is, does this behavior or thought align with where you want to be in your life? And so that gives them room to think about it. You know, like there's no right or wrong answer,
Mhm.
right? But it's possible
Mhm.
that you just even thinking that can be helpful.
Yes. Well, and it can help with the shame for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your program. So you have some about befriending your body. Let's talk about too how people can get a hold of you and what is it that you
Sure.
offer people individually as well as in groups.
Yeah. So 2021 is like lots of offerings happening, but I have a group program called Befriend Your Body, which is an 8-week program designed to help women. I don't, I want to say heal body image, but help them heal, right? Because I don't think 8 weeks you're going to be healed, right? I think you are going to feel better. And you're going to get from maybe like one stage of change to the next. um,
Mhm.
and so that group also comes with a digital course, and it talks all about health at every size. It talks about fat phobia, talks about body neutrality, talks about disordered eating, and how all of those things play into us struggling with body image. So that's one thing. I also do one-on-one coaching and therapy. Therapy, if you live in Louisiana or Tennessee, it's coaching, recovery coaching if you don't live in those states.
Mhm.
And that's a really good option for people who want one-on-one work, want to get deep dive into their eating disorder behaviors. And this is really for people who are in recovery already. So
Mhm.
this is not for the person who is like straight out of an inpatient center. Like this is for a lot of people in quasi recovery, which means like you're kind of trying but struggling,
Right.
or people who like are just having a hard time maybe with disordered eating, right? So it's not for people who are really in a severe eating disorder, because it's all online and I can't, it's just kind of it's different. It's more about the here and now. It's more about how are we going to get you. It's very solution focused,
Mhm.
and it's very driven by behavior stuff. We certainly get into the emotionals because we need to, but it's much more catered to somebody who is struggling in their recovery, which I
Okay.
think most people struggle in their recovery and they need help once their treatment is over. um,
Mhm.
I have some passive courses that are less expensive for people who are not willing to make the investment into those things right now.
Mhm.
And one is called Detox from Diet Culture. And that is just a PDF. It's long, it's like 50 pages of content and reflection questions and prompting, which people really like because they can do it themselves. And there's not like we meet at this time in this place. It's kind of for the busy person who wants to work on it but can't commit to live meetings. That's it for
Mhm.
now. I think I have a dream of wanting to work with professionals and help them with supervision in terms of working with people with eating disorders and body image, because it's such a specialty that's something I think I want to do in the future.
Mhm.
And to reach me, um, I have a website. It's my name, katielynch.lcsw.com. And Instagram is the same. And my email is the same at Gmail. So you can reach me at any of those ways.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. This is such a deep area where there's so much misinformation, so much new research that's being done, and our culture is starting to be more aware, but maybe not really changing that much. And our conditioning is so deep around how we feel about our bodies and other people's bodies. And it's such a foundational part of our healing if we have issues around this. It's something at some point, if we want to be healed, we really need to do
Yes.
this work.
Right. And I really do think this work requires working with somebody. Like, I don't think that this is one of those things that you can just kind of heal
Mhm.
on your own. Because I do think that because this information is not really readily out there and available on purpose, I think, like, and maybe that's kind of weird of me to say, but like a lot of people don't know about health at every size because that wouldn't be fruitful for the food industry for people to know about that book. And so, we didn't talk about this, but the obesity epidemic, which people are very frightened by, is there's actually no epidemic of obesity, and obesity numbers have been skyrocketing down for years. But people don't talk about that because there's a lot of money to be made in stuff like that.
Yours, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of reasons to read this book. I like can't talk about it enough, but it changed me.
Mhm.
Um, there's a lot of science behind it, but it's easy to read, which is really good for a social science person like me.
Well, and it'll give people a chance to work with the denial too
Yes.
of reality and of my fault, not my fault. This
Yes.
how this works, genetics, all of that.
Yes. And
Yeah.
there's grief in that and relief. There's
Mhm.
both, you know? I think there's grief and anger in recognizing I've been taught things that are untrue,
Yeah.
and then relief in like, oh, this isn't my fault that I'm this size. right? And like
Mhm.
that's healing on its own, you know?
Mhm. And anger at those people that
And
are
anger, yes, that have made you
ruining our
feel
diet for
small and
me.
otherwise for not being 120 pounds, a size 2, and staying that way your whole life, right?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, there's some pretty greedy behavior going on in the diet industry, that's
Yes,
for sure, and a real lack of willingness to consider our health
right.
as
Our true
clearly.
health.
Yeah.
And true health is body, mind, and spirit. It is not just
Mhm.
calories in and calories out. Sorry to say. Mhm.
Well, and if that worked,
It would have worked,
it would have worked
right?
by now.
We
Yeah.
wouldn't be talking about this.
Yeah.
If it would have worked, everyone would be quote unquote thin, healthy, and beautiful, and like
Mhm.
there would be no problems, right? But the
Yeah.
human body is much more complicated than that.
Yeah, and it's not a Disney movie, we can have
No.
a really satisfying life without being a certain weight.
Well, and that's like what Befriend Your Body is really about. Body image is important to me because body image is distraction, right? Like
Mhm.
when we're obsessed with our body, we're distracting from something. And so
Yes.
if we're able to really pull away at that and say, like, what is underneath my obsession with my thighs? Like, am I just really scared of what I'm going to find emotionally? Because my dream for people is for women mostly to stand in their power and be their true, authentic selves.
Mm,
And diet culture has made us small in a lot of ways.
mhm.
And I want me, my children, anybody around me to feel like they can be loud and they can enjoy their lives and they don't have to be skinny to enjoy them.
Well, that's a good note to end on.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Lynn.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. It's been great talking with you.
You too.
Welcome to the 2021 Radical Recovery Summit, presented by the Killaby Center for Recovery. This is Lynn Fraser, your moderator. This year, our theme is Feel It, Heal It, a new paradigm of recovery, featuring a diverse group of thought leaders and innovators, people who are working on the ground in the new field of addiction recovery. Go to radicalrecoverysummit.com to sign up and watch free.